Hi, welcome to my presentation for RP699. I'm Lynn Lang from St. Louis, Missouri. I want to talk today about a model that I've created for Catholic education, virtue-based restorative discipline. It is a Catholic response to bullying behaviors. Originally, it was developed in St. Louis for our schools here, and it became a national model pretty quickly. So it's pretty exciting work. It's based on the idea that if we could cultivate holy habits of excellence in the virtues, we could lay that as a foundation, and then upon that build restorative practices, which is designed to develop and cultivate high quality relationships. The two main ideas that I'll be talking about today are 21st century virtue-based restorative leadership. This is the expansion of this work. As I started working in schools, I would have pastors coming and asking, could they implement this in the parish? Speaking from the pulpit on Sundays. I had religious communities inviting me to come in and work with them on their communication skills using some of these restorative practices. So pretty soon the work expanded to what I call virtue-based restorative practices. The second idea is for schools that are deeply cultivating this VBRD community. I have added a component for social emotional learning that I believe is strengthening both social emotional learning and virtue literacy. The apostolic mission of Catholic education is to love one another. Scripture tells us, love one another as I have loved you. Today's businesses and schools and organizations are finding that people are driven by a mission, shared common vision, and that's more important than a big paycheck that you might get in the secular or the public sector. And unfortunately, aggressive behavior plagues our American schools. And bullying behavior, looking as simple as name calling to physical violence of all sorts, it certainly contradicts the apostolic mission of Catholic education. So as we look at the virtues, the foundation of virtues that I have worked with are, first of all, in the Catholic world, the theological and the cardinal virtues that you can see listed here. So when I'm working with young people, I use more what I call user-friendly virtues that are found in Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15 in the Bible. But then I started working with Peterson and Seligman's work on core virtues, and these 6 virtues transcend all cultures, races, religions, because they are what these two authors have determined are critical for the survival of the human species. The other virtues I'm looking at are the 10 virtues of outstanding leaders, and this is from Geeney and Green's work. And as you can see, this is a pretty extensive list as well. In looking at virtue-based restorative leadership, leadership is not one simple definition, but rather it's a collection of behaviors and actions and activities that a person does that truly, in retrospect, we can look back and say, this is a leadership model. As many times, good leadership will empower everyone in that organization, including themselves, to be working at their maximum potential. As we look at the 21st century workforce, that there's a greater need in the human heart than ever before to shift from professional development that meets the needs of many to really more individualized coaching. And because we have technology, we're buried further and further away from one-on-one contact. So we long for that. So in a coaching model, we can talk about, well, what is a virtue that you believe you need in order to inspire yourself and other people to operate at their fullest potential? So restorative practices in virtue development grew naturally out of the VBRD framework by building a strong infrastructure for staff circles, compassionate witnessing, professional learning groups. As we look at the second aspect of social emotional learning, think about Waddy Piper's I think I can, that mantra so many young people grew up remembering. And if you're like me, you grew up learning about what it means to be a good doobie. I was kind, I shared, and I did kind things. And so these are the early markers for social emotional learning. And yet we haven't really formalized it into something that spans our national conversation, just with education, but in particular, integrating restorative practices. This grid shows how the development of social emotional learning can begin with self-awareness, which is the cultivation of virtue. So if I'm reflecting on virtue, I am engaging in self-awareness. And then I become more aware of myself and others. So it's what's good for me and what's good for us. How am I managing the world around me? Am I controlling my temper? And then leadership lives in this relational management quadrant. And this is where we can cultivate what are the virtues of relationship management, the virtue of hope. We're a change catalyst. We cultivate integrity and leadership. So as I put my ideas together, so as you can see in this grid, I've done just that. So prudence is practical moral wisdom, and that's intellectual excellence, and it's also self-management. So if you can see how the cardinal and theological virtues, Peterson and Seligman's work, and Jeannie and Green's work connect with social emotional learning, it makes perfect sense that we could do this in our circles. One of the examples that I have that's most stunning in this work is a group of 5th grade girls who were in conflict in one of my urban schools. And as they were trying to come up with a plan, the teachers asked me to come in and run a circle. So I began this by asking the girls, so what is frustration? How would you define frustration? And so then we began to talk and define and look at aspects of that one particular emotion and then break it out. And then the final question was, so when you're feeling frustrated, is there a virtue that you can work on that can help you to overcome your frustration? Or the second question would be, if you know someone around you is frustrated, what can you do? What virtue could you practice to help that other person? The beauty of this is for students to understand in the circle setting how their emotion and experience of frustration is very different than the person sitting across the circle from them. This is true also as we work with adults, and because we obviously need to teach adults so they can teach students. What I'm finding is that this social emotional connection isn't common in conversations in schools. Another example in the leadership model was each year I host a summer institute. Schools come from all over the country to be trained in BBRD. But the last year I had a pastor that came and gave a presentation on restorative practices and holy identity. And it was a beautiful blend of scripture, of virtue, of restorative practices, talking about how these things all are so aligned and make so much sense together. And after the presentation, the administrators that were participating were asked to do some reflection and some surveys for management styles and spiritual gifts and spiritual opportunities like hospitality or evangelization. So some of the richer, deeper thoughts around who we are in our ministries and how we connect that to the apostolic mission of Catholic education. What we did was broaden it and looked at leadership as a whole and cultivating between the presentation and the two surveys. They were able to discuss with their peers, work individually, and be reflective. And then they walked away after 2 days with an action plan for their own leadership style, whether it be in their school or the next job they were going to with their families or in their communities. And the evaluations on that were top. 3 out of 3 for 100% of the participants. Very happy that we had done that. The time was well spent. So the implications for these practices, the implication for broadening these doesn't rely simply on Catholic virtues. It can be expanded. But this work began in my world when I was hired by the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And now in 2018, I'll be going independent. As somebody said, you've been kicked out of the nest. And so I'm working independently now and finding myself busier than ever. But I love the work because I do believe that this is my call to evangelization, but I also believe that it's making the world a better place. At least I hope so. Thank you.